Mary Thompson stepped onto the polished marble floor of the airport terminal, her black leather handbag resting lightly on her arm and a small bouquet of bright yellow daisies held gently in her hand. She moved through the crowd with quiet confidence, her dark brown eyes taking in the bustle around her. Every so often, she paused to straighten the crisp white collar of her blouse or smooth the lines of her suit jacket. As she approached the check-in counter, she felt a gentle flutter in her chest, excitement for the reunion with her son, but also a familiar flutter of nerves that she had carried since the day he first left home for college. She stepped forward. When her line came, offering a warm smile to the airline agent. "Good morning," she said in a calm, even tone. "I'm Mary Thompson. I believe I have a reservation under that name." She leaned forward a bit, and as she did, the soft fabric of her blouse brushed against her skin. The daisies in her hand caught the light, their yellow petals bright against the muted tones of the terminal. The agent tapped at her keyboard, and Mary watched the screen for a moment, imagining the boarding pass that would pop up. She reminded herself not to fidget. She had learned long ago how to keep her composure, even in tense moments. But this time, she felt different this time. She was a mother waiting to see her son, and that changed everything. The agent cleared his throat and looked up, offering a polite smile. "Ms. Thompson, I'm sorry, but the first-class section on this flight is full. We've assigned you an aisle seat in economy. Would you like to proceed with that?" A split second, Mary's smile faltered. She felt a sting of disappointment, sharper than she had expected. In her mind, she pictured her son David, now the CEO of the airline, sitting in the front cabin. She had imagined herself joining him there, sharing a few moments of pride as she listened to the hum of the engines up front, looking down on the world below. But she steadied herself. She pressed her lips together, straightened her back, and nodded. "That's fine," she said softly, her voice steady. "Thank you very much." She accepted the boarding pass, folded it neatly, and slipped it into her wallet. Then she turned away, keeping her back straight and holding the bouquet close to her chest so no one could see her disappointment. As she walked away from the counter, she tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear and reminded herself that nothing was lost. After all, it was just a seat assignment. Her son's love and respect for her would not change because she rode in coach. Mary found a quiet spot by a large window that overlooked the tarmac. Planes of all shapes and sizes lined up, their engines humming softly even while parked. She closed her eyes for a moment and breathed in deeply, letting the cool air fill her lungs. Memories floated into her mind, images of her son as a boy, the way he chased after kites in the park, the proud smile on his face when he showed her his first drawing, the night she stayed up late helping him with his science fair project. She remembered how he had once been teased by classmates for asking too many questions in class, and how she had held his hand afterward, promising him that curiosity was a gift, not a flaw. A gentle voice broke into her thoughts. "Excuse me? Ma'am, are you Mary Thompson?" She opened her eyes to see a flight attendant standing nearby, her uniform neat and her expression kind. Mary returned her smile. "Yes, that's me. I'm so sorry to bother you, but we just wanted to confirm that seating arrangement. We're aware that you requested a first-class seat, but as it stands, we're completely full up front. However, if anything opens up before boarding, we will do our best to move you up." Mary nodded appreciatively. "Thank you for letting me know. I understand." She offered the attendant a warm smile, pausing to brush the daisies with her fingertips. She did not mention the fact that she was the CEO's mother, or that her son might be on the flight himself. She preferred to be treated just like everyone else. As the attendant walked away, Mary turned back to the window and watched crews loading luggage into the belly of a jet. Mother and child walked past, the child's small hand wrapped tightly around the mother's finger. Mary thought about how many times she had held David's hand like that, guiding him through crowded stores or across busy streets. Sometimes she worried that she had done too much, worried that he needed to learn his own limits. But now she knew those early lessons had given him the confidence to stand tall in a boardroom and make difficult decisions that affected thousands of employees. Her mind drifted back to the moment she first told him he would attend a top university. He had been so proud and terrified all at once. She had watched him practice his dinner speech at home, his cheeks flushing bright red as he struggled to find the right words. And she had cheered the loudest when he received his acceptance letter. Tears had streamed down her face as she held him close, promising him that she would always be there no matter where life took him. A voice over the intercom called passengers for pre-boarding. Mary rose to her feet, adjusted her handbag, and took one last look at the window before moving toward the gate. She lifted her bouquet carefully, afraid of brushing too hard and crushing the delicate petals. She made her way through the line of passengers, exchanging polite nods and soft smiles. Some offered sympathetic glances when they read her boarding. "Pass." Mary nodded back, silently thanking them for their kindness, but refusing to let pity linger in her heart. She reached the gate agent and presented her pass. The agent scanned it and handed it back without a word. Mary walked down the jetway, her heels clicking softly against the metal floor. She paused at the entrance to the plane, took a steadying breath, and smiled at the flight attendant stationed in the aisle. "Good morning," she said again, trying to sound enthusiastic. "I'm in seat 2 for C. Welcome aboard, Ms. Thompson," the attendant said with a professional smile. "Just down this aisle to your right." Mary thanked her and made her way to the seat. On the way, she passed empty first-class seats with their larger armchairs and extra legroom. She let her gaze sweep over the cabin for a moment, noting the polished wood accents and soft lighting. A familiar pang of longing rose in her chest. But she reminded herself that true pride did not come from a seat assignment. It came from her son's achievements and the journey they had shared. She settled into her aisle seat, tucking her legs neatly together. She placed the bouquet on the seat beside her, careful not to crush the daisies. She then rearranged her handbag so that it fit snugly under the seat in front of her. Across from her, a young woman smiled and nodded in greeting. Mary returned the nod, feeling a sense of community among strangers who shared the small cabin. Space. As the plane prepared for departure, Mary leaned back and closed her eyes for a moment. She thought about all the flights she had taken over the years' flights. She could not afford as a single mother raising her son on her own. She remembered flying with him when he was lame with the flu, clutching him close as he drifted off to sleep in her arms. Years ago, these trips had been filled with worry and financial strain, but she had never let him see how tired she was. Now she sat in this seat, the mother of the airline CEO, finally at ease with her place in the world. When the engines roared to life and the plane began to taxi, Mary opened her eyes and studied the safety card tucked in the pocket in front of her. She listened politely as the flight attendant explained the safety procedures. But her mind wandered to the final moments before she would see David. She pictured him walking down the jetway, his tall frame moving with a quiet grace. She imagined the smile he would give her and the hug they would share, a hug that spoke of pride, respect, and unspoken gratitude for the woman who had given him everything. Mary sat up straight, adjusted her watch, and glanced at the daisies once more. She was ready. Soon, her son would walk in, and every small disappointment, every moment of doubt would fade away in the warmth of their reunion. Closed her eyes again, feeling the gentle hum of the engines beneath her feet, and allowed herself a small smile of hope. The journey ahead was about more than a seat on a plane. It was a celebration of how far they had both come together. Nothing, not even a full first-class cabin, could diminish the pride she felt in her heart. Mary settled into her aisle seat and felt the soft vibration of the plane as it prepared for takeoff. She adjusted the strap of her handbag, letting it rest on her lap, and placed the small bouquet of yellow daisies gently on the tray table before. Folding it down, cabin lights were dimmed slightly, and she could hear the low hum of conversation around her. Some passengers chatted quietly. Others read books or scrolled through their phones. Mary reached for her novel, hoping it would help pass the time. She opened the book to a bookmarked page and tried to focus on the words, but her mind kept drifting back to the moment at the check-in counter. She had wanted to tell the agent who she was, to simply drop her mother's name and see the reaction. She wondered if things would have been different then. But deep inside, she knew she would never do that. She wanted respect to come from her own merits, not from her son's position. She reminded herself again that she was fine. She was strong. As the flight attendants walked down the aisle checking seats, a young attendant paused beside her and smiled. "Good morning, ma'am. Can I get you anything before we take off?" Mary returned the smile, her calm tone unshaken. "No, thank you. I'm all right." The attendant nodded and moved on. Mary watched her walk away, noticing how every uniform looked so crisp and clean under the soft lights. She thought of David in his role as CEO, wearing a suit every day, greeting staff at terminals, and reviewing company reports. In a way, she had prepared him for this life with every gentle lesson she had given him. The plane's engines roared to life, and the cabin shuddered slightly as the pilot taxied onto the runway. Mary felt her heart flutter at the familiar thrill of flight. She glanced out the window and saw the city lights fade as the plane climbed into the sky. The lights turned off completely once they reached cruising altitude, and a small ding signaled that passengers could unbuckle their seatbelts. Mary slipped hers off and leaned back, letting out a long breath. She looked around the cabin. In front of her, on the left side, the first-class section gleamed with spacious seats and extra legroom. A family of 3 sat near the window too, parents and a young child. The mother smiled as she handed a blanket to the child, tucking them in for the flight. The father adjusted his neck pillow and looked out at the clouds. Mary's gaze lingered on them for a moment, and she felt a small pang. She reminded herself that she had flown in this section only once, when David surprised her with a gift many years ago. It had been a lovely surprise, but she had since decided to keep that memory as a private celebration of his success. Phew. Rows ahead, a group of business travelers discussed their work in quiet murmurs. Mary recognized a familiar brand name on one of their laptops. They chatted about meetings in New York and London, and she imagined the deals they were closing. She remembered David's first business trip, how nervous he had been when he left home for a conference in Chicago. She had driven him to the airport, hugged him tight, and told him to believe in himself. He had called her that evening, full of excitement and gratitude. That call had made her heart swell. Mary picked up her novel again, but the words swam before her eyes. She set the book aside, reached into her handbag, and pulled out a small notebook and pen. She opened to a fresh page and wrote a few lines. "Today I ride coach, but I feel like I'm flying first class in my heart, proud of my son." She smiled at her own words. Writing had always been a way for her to sort her thoughts and calm her mind. She wrote about her journey from a small town to this moment. She wrote about long nights working extra shifts to pay for David's school supplies. She wrote about watching him stand on a graduation stage and the applause that filled the auditorium. A soft chime sounded as the flight attendant began the beverage service. Mary watched as the attendant wheeled down the aisle with a cart full of drinks. The attendant paused in front of Mary and asked, "Would you like something to drink, ma'am?" Mary thought for a moment. She felt a warm cup of tea would be comforting. "Yes, please. A hot tea would be lovely." The attendant smiled and wrote it down. A few moments later, she returned with a steaming cup. Mary accepted it gratefully and held it between her hands, feeling the warmth spread through her fingers. She sipped the tea slowly, enjoying its gentle flavor. As she did, she noticed another passenger across the aisle glance at her with recognition. It was the same woman who had whispered about the CEO's mother earlier. Mary caught her eye and offered a polite nod. The woman blushed slightly and looked away. Mary felt no anger toward her. Instead, she felt compassion. She knew how easy it was to jump to conclusions or to gossip without knowing the whole story. She thought back to times when she herself had judged others before hearing their story. She reminded herself that kindness and understanding were always the better path. As the flight continued, Mary closed her eyes and let the hum of the engines lull her. She thought about David again, picturing him seated in a distant boardroom, making decisions that affected thousands of employees around the world. She wondered if he realized how much his mother's faith in him had shaped his life. She hoped that one day he would share the lessons she had taught him with other young people, to show them that love and support could build strong leaders. After a while, a soft ding signaled that the cabin lights would be raised for meal service. Mary opened her eyes and watched as passengers prepared for lunch. She reached into her handbag and pulled out some crackers she had brought, eating a few while the attendants worked. She tried to settle back into her seat, but excitement bubbled in her chest. Soon, the plane would begin its descent, and her son would walk through that cabin. She imagined the moment vividly, his tall frame appearing in the aisle, his warm smile lighting up the small space. She wondered if he would carry a small gift for her, just as she had carried a bouquet of daisies for him. Mary pressed her forehead against the headrest and closed her eyes. She breathed in deeply, savoring the scent of her tea still lingering on her fingers. She felt calm and proud. She knew that no matter where she sat on this plane, she was flying high on love. And when her son finally arrived, every small disappointment would fade, leaving only the joy of reunion. And in that moment, she would be exactly where she was meant to be. Mary sat quietly, her hands folded in her lap, as the plane cruised through clear blue skies. The soft thrum of the engines was a gentle companion to her thoughts. Round her, passengers began to notice something unusual. Whispers drifted down. The rose like tiny birds calling to one another, soft and hesitant at first. Then they grew bolder. Mary sensed a shift in the cabin air, as if everyone were leaning in a little closer, trying to catch a glimpse of something just out of sight. It started with a few curious glances. A man 2 rows ahead tapped his wife's arm and nodded discreetly in Mary's direction. She felt the weight of his stare, but refused to look up. She continued to read the safety card in her seat pocket, though she already knew every detail by heart. Soon, another passenger across the aisle leaned toward his neighbor and murmured something, their heads almost touching. Mary could not make out the words, but she felt the ripple of conversation pass through the cabin like a quiet wave. A flight attendant moved down the aisle, checking on drink orders. 2 women in front of Mary turned back and exchanged a quick look before returning their attention to the attendant. Mary closed her eyes for a moment and took a slow, steadying breath. She reminded herself that curiosity was natural. She had spent a lifetime teaching her son to be curious, to ask questions, and to seek truth. Now, she found herself the focus of whispered speculation, and she chose to meet it with calm kindness. From the corner of her eye, she saw a young man pull out his phone and snap a quick photo of her seat. She wondered what he planned to do with the picture. Post it online, perhaps? Share it with friends? Mary thought of the years she had spent helping her son navigate public life, shielding him from gossip and rumor. Now that she was here, alone in economy class, it felt strange to be on the other side of the story. But she sat up a little straighter, determined not to let her composure waver. As murmurs grew, an uneasy hush fell over the cabin. Even the hum of the engine seemed too quiet in anticipation. A tall passenger in a dark suit stood in the aisle, pretending to stretch, but his eyes never left Mary. He glanced at his watch, then at Mary, as though waiting for someone to emerge from the forward cabin. Mary wondered if her son had called ahead, warning of his mother's arrival. She shook the thought away. David always taught her to trust herself, to stand firm on her own 2 feet. Then she heard it, a soft but firm voice, low enough that only nearby passengers could hear. "Is that her? The CEO's mother?" 2 women leaned in, nodding their heads. Mary recognized the name David Thompson spoken in quiet tones. Words floated to her like drifting leaves. She looked up slowly, meeting their gaze with gentle eyes. The women froze, surprised to see her looking at them directly. They blushed and whispered apologies. Mary offered them a small, assured smile, as if to say, "No harm done." That smile was enough to calm them. As they turned back to their own seats, their curiosity momentarily sated. Across the aisle, a child pointed at Mary and tugged at her mother's sleeve. "Mom, that lady looks like someone famous," the child said in a soft voice. The mother hushed her, then leaned forward. Mary responded with an encouraging nod. She did not feel embarrassed. Instead, she felt a strange warmth, that glow of recognition that comes when one realizes their quiet strength has a ripple effect. She thought of the lessons she had taught David: be proud but humble, accept respect with grace, and always treat others with kindness. Nervous energy spread through the cabin. Some passengers checked their boarding passes again, as if confirming that they had been seated correctly. Others looked back toward the first-class section, perhaps hoping that the man they believed to be the CEO might appear and shift the story. Mary imagined how David would feel watching this scene unfold. He was a private man by nature, preferring to lead without fanfare. Yet here, in the close quarters of an airplane cabin, the story had already taken on a life of its own. She noticed the flight attendants whispering among themselves. One of them glanced Mary's way, then quickly looked away. Mary thought of the countless times she had traveled for work and family, how she often passed through this same routine. She remembered the first time she had flown with David, back when he was a boy, and she could barely afford the tickets. She had held him close, whispering encouragement as the plane lifted off the ground. Now she sat here, alone and yet not alone, wrapped in stories woven by strangers. Mary reached into her handbag and pulled out the small notebook she had used. On the flight, she flipped to the page where she had written earlier, "Today I ride coach. But I feel like I'm flying first class in my heart." She read the words silently, letting them remind her of the journey that had brought her here. She turned the notebook so that the other passengers could not see her writing. Then, with a calm hand, she closed it and tucked it away. Moments later, a flight attendant approached Mary's row with a friendly smile. "Miss Thompson, would you like anything else?" she asked quietly, perhaps hoping to smooth any tension. Mary thanked her, shaking her head. "No, thank you," she replied. "I'm fine." The attendant offered a sympathetic nod before moving on. Mary watched her go, appreciating the gesture. In that small space, kindness carried more weight than any seat assignment. As the flight reached its halfway point, the cabin lights were dimmed for a rest period. Mary leaned back in her seat, closing her eyes and listening to the gentle rhythm of the engines. She allowed herself to feel the pride that welled up in her chest, not just pride in her son's success, but pride in her own strength. She had built a life of purpose, teaching her child to aim high and to treat others with respect. Now, even as rumors swirled around her, she knew her true value did not depend on whispers in an economy cabin. The rest period passed quietly. Soft chimes signaled that the lights would brighten again for the cabin service. Mary opened her eyes, ready to continue the journey. She felt calm, composed, and fully present. She glanced down the aisle toward the forward cabin, wondering if her son would soon walk through. In that moment, every whispered rumor and curious glance seemed insignificant. What mattered most was the reunion waiting at the end of the aisle. Mary took one last steady breath and reached for the armrest, preparing herself for whichever stories the rest of the flight would bring. She had faced dismissals and judgments all her life. She knew how to meet them with grace, strength, and a gentle smile. And as the cabin lights brightened and the flight attendants resumed their work, Mary Thompson felt ready for whatever came next. Certain that her quiet dignity would carry her forward until the moment her son's familiar face appeared in the aisle. Mary sat upright as the cabin lights brightened once more, signaling that the flight was preparing for its final descent. Her heart fluttered at the thought that soon she would be reunited with her son. David, she had watched countless films about homecomings, but nothing compared to the real thing. She straightened the small bouquet of yellow daisies resting on the tray table and smoothed her hair, making sure she looked composed. Just then she felt a shift in the weight of the cabin. Heads turned and a hush fell as passengers sensed something important was about to happen. Mary's chest tightened with anticipation. She kept her gaze steady, pretending to examine the safety card in front of her. Beneath the surface, her mind raced with memories of David as a child, his shy smile, his gentle laugh, his determined steps toward each new challenge. From the corner of her eye, Mary saw a tall figure appear at the entrance to the forward cabin. At first, she thought it might be a flight attendant returning to clear empty plates. But as the figure stepped into the aisle, she recognized that familiar, confident stride. Her breath caught in her throat. It was David. He wore dark slacks, a crisp white shirt, and navy blazer clothes, as neat and professional as any CEO's uniform. Yet without the stiffness of formality, Mary allowed herself a small, grateful smile. She rose from her seat, tucking the daisies carefully into a corner of her handbag so they would not be crushed. She smoothed the front of her blazer and looked straight ahead, standing tall and proud. She did not rush or look anxious. Instead, She met the moment with quiet dignity. David paused in the aisle, scanning the cabin. His keen eyes swept past first class, then business, then economy, until they settled on his mother's seat. His face softened, a warm light filling his gaze. Passengers in the aisle stepped aside, giving him room to approach. Mary could see the realization and concern cross his features as he drew closer. "Mother," said softly, using the gentle tone he reserved for her alone. His voice carried across the few feet between them, clear and steady. Mary turned toward him and returned his soft greeting. Even in the close quarters of an airplane, she felt his presence fill the space. "David," she replied, her voice calm, but full of emotion. She reached out and rested her hand lightly on his arm. He smiled and lifted her hand to his lips, brushing it with a gentle kiss. It was a gesture from another time, the time when he was a boy, and she comforted him after bad dreams. Now it warmed her heart in a way no boardroom accolade ever could. David looked around at the nearby passengers, many of whom watched with polite curiosity. He offered them a nod and a small "thank you" for their space and understanding. Then his gaze returned to Mary. "I'm so sorry, Mother," he said, his voice hushed. "I heard you were in economy. Should have arranged something better." His words were careful, humble. Mary could see the weight of responsibility in his eyes, the quiet ache of a son who wished to spare his mother any hardship. Mary placed her free hand on his arm. "David, please," she said gently. "You did nothing wrong. I'm fine here." She saw the conflict in his expression, his desire to protect her, his fear that she had suffered any discomfort. She squeezed his arm lightly. "I chose to. Right here. It felt right." He nodded, though his concern did not fade entirely. He knelt slightly, so he was eye level with her in the aisle. His presence, usually so commanding in a boardroom, was now tender and attentive. He glanced at the seat across from Mary, still empty, a first-class seat waiting for her. "Would you like to sit there now?" he asked, gesturing to the vacant armchair. The passengers around them watched in respectful silence, some smiling at the touching reunion. Mary looked at the plush seat, then back at David. She smiled warmly and shook her head. "Not yet," she replied softly. "I want to finish this journey with you, beside me." Her voice carried a quiet strength. She meant it. She wanted this moment to be shared fully, from economy to first, so that every passenger could witness that respect is earned and given. Regardless of seat class, David closed his eyes for a moment, taking in his mother's words. He nodded in understanding. Then he rose fully to his feet and gently guided her to stand beside him in the aisle. Mary placed her hand in the crook of his elbow as they stood together, side by side. Passengers shifted in their seats to watch. Some leaned forward, others sat back with gentle smiles. The cabin held its breath. Mary and David formed a quiet focal point amid the humming engines. Mary felt a wave of warmth as she stood next to her son, the woman who had raised him now standing proudly by his side. David turned and faced the cabin. "Everyone," he began, his voice projecting kindly yet clearly. "Thank you all for your patience." His words carried both authority and gratitude. "This is my mother, Mary Thompson." He paused and Mary saw sparks of recognition in several eyes. "She has always been my inspiration." Mary blushed slightly as passengers offered applause, soft, respectful claps that echoed down the aisle. She inclined her head in acknowledgement, her heart full. David continued, "I asked her to join me for the rest of the flight. If anyone has empty seats in first class, please let her take one." A flight attendant stepped forward just behind David, smiling in relief. She offered her arm to Mary and escorted her toward the front cabin. David walked beside his mother, still holding her arm gently. Mary glanced back once at the passengers in economy, many of whom returned her gaze with warm encouragement. Gave them each a small wave which brought more smiles. They reached the first-class section, where the empty seat waited, its fine leather gleaming in the overhead lights. Mary sat carefully, tucking her handbag and daisies beside her. David seated himself in the adjacent seat, taking off his blazer and draping it over the seat back. He looked across at her, concern still in his eyes. "You're comfortable now?" he asked, his voice soft. Mary nodded. Very comfortable, she assured him. She took a moment to look around. The generous legroom, the plush armrests, the small pillow resting against the cabin wall. She reached down to adjust the daisies so they sat neatly on the side table as the flight attendants resumed their service. Bringing extra pillows and warm towels, David leaned back. He reached over and took his mother's hand in his. Glad you're here, he said quietly. Thank you for understanding. Mary squeezed his hand and smiled. I understand your world, David, she said in simple words. And I know how much you do for so many people. But today, I just wanted to be with you. Her voice was gentle, full of love. They sat in companionable silence for a while, watching the clouds drift past the window. Mary felt a deep peace settle over her. The earlier whispers, the seating mix-up, the curious stares, they all felt like part of a larger story. One that spoke of humility, resilience, and the bond between a mother and her son. David reached into his pocket and pulled out a small gift box, which he had brought on board to surprise her. He handed it to Mary with a playful grin. She opened it carefully to find a delicate necklace, a simple gold chain with a small pendant shaped like a pair of wings. It's for you, David said. You gave me wings to fly. Mary's eyes filled with tears of joy. She lifted the necklace and held it close to her heart. The other passengers watched with soft smiles as mother and son shared their private moment. Mary put the necklace on, fastening it herself. She stood and then turned in her seat so that she faced the cabin. Thank you, everyone, she said, her voice clear and warm. Your kindness means more to me than you know. Another round of applause rose in the cabin. Mary returned to her seat, gently patting David's hand. He leaned back and relaxed at last, his usual calm restored. The flight attendants resumed their work quietly, giving the pair the space they needed as the plane began its final descent. Mary rested her head on the headrest and closed her eyes, feeling safe and loved. She opened them again when the captain announced that they would soon land. She smiled at David, who reached over and gave her hand a reassuring squeeze. Soon the plane touched down, and they moved off the runway toward the terminal. Mary gathered her belongings, her handbag, her daisies, and the gift box she would treasure forever. David stood beside her, guiding her gently as they walked down the aisle together. At the exit, they paused. David bent down and gave his mother a hug, wrapping his arms around her shoulders. Mary felt the warmth of his embrace and whispered, I love you, son. He responded in her ear, I love you too, mother. They stepped off the plane into the bright terminal lights. Cameras flashed as they approached the exit doors, journalists and onlookers eager to capture the moment. But Mary and David walked on, side by side, beyond the crowd, leaving the whispers behind. Mary knew that this journey would be one they remembered always. It was more than a flight. It was a testament to their bond, to respect earned through love, and to the simple truth that no seat in the world could match the feeling of standing together, proud and unafraid. Mary and David stepped off the plane into the bright terminal light. Mary felt the cool air of the airport wash over her, and she closed her eyes for a moment to savor the scene. Around them, other passengers gathered their bags and made their way toward baggage claim or connecting flights. But Mary and David moved together, side by side, toward the exit where a small crowd had already formed. As they walked, Mary kept pace with her son, matching his long strides. She felt a sense of joy that filled her chest like warm sunshine. The daisies she had carried now sat safely in her handbag, their petals still bright. David saw the pride shining in his eyes. He glanced back and offered her a gentle smile. Mary nodded, feeling the bond between them grow even stronger in that simple exchange. They reached the exit doors and paused. Outside, a few reporters waited with cameras and microphones. A line of airport staff stood nearby, waving politely. Mary straightened her shoulders and looked out into the crowd. She felt a momentary flutter of nerves. Public attention had never been her goal, but she remembered that her true strength came from honesty and kindness. She lifted her head and stepped into view with confidence. A reporter stepped forward, microphone in hand. Mr. Thompson, she called out, can you tell us why your mother was seated in economy class? David faced the reporter, his expression calm and open. He took a breath and spoke clearly so everyone could hear. My mother chose to sit in economy, he said. She wanted to travel like everyone else. But this experience showed us something important. Respect and fairness matter. To all of us. The reporter nodded and asked a follow-up question. Will the airline change its policies after today's events? David smiled warmly. Yes, he replied. We will ensure that every passenger, regardless of status or background, receives the respect they deserve. I will send a company-wide memo later today, reinforcing our commitment to fairness on every flight. Mary felt her heart swell with pride. She had always taught David that every person's dignity was sacred. Now, as CEO of a major airline, he would carry that lesson forward for thousands of employees and millions of passengers. She squeezed his hand and whispered, I'm so proud of you. He looked down, gratitude shining in his eyes, and squeezed back. Thank you, Mother, he said softly. They moved past the reporters and into the arrival hall. David led Mary to a quiet spot near a row of benches. He helped her sit down and reached into his pocket for his phone. He tapped a few times, sending the memo he had promised. Mary watched as he typed the words, to all staff, treat every passenger with respect and kindness. Our mission is to serve people, not just seat classes. Thank you for upholding our values. He hit send and laid his phone on his lap. A travel assistant approached with 2 glasses of sparkling water. Mary accepted one gratefully and took a slow sip. The bubbles tickled her tongue, and she smiled. The assistant told them their car was ready and pointed toward the exit where a black sedan waited. Mary rose from the bench, brushing off her skirt. David offered his arm, and she took it. Together, they walked outside into the golden evening light. The car ride was smooth and quiet. Mary looked out at the city lights twinkling as dusk settled in. She remembered the long nights she had spent working 2 jobs to save for David's education, the times she worried about money or his safety, the prayers she whispered late at night. Now, watching the skyline pass by, she felt a deep sense of peace. She had given her son everything she could, and he had grown into a leader who carried her lessons in his heart. David glanced at her and spoke softly. Mother, I want the world to know that you are the reason I am who I am. I hope everyone understands that true greatness comes from caring for others. Mary turned to him, her eyes bright. You already honor me every day, she replied. Seeing you act with kindness shows me that my work was not in vain. When they arrived at David's home, he helped Mary out of the car and guided her inside. The house was filled with light and warmth, decorated with photos from David's childhood. Him playing in the sand, graduation day, family holidays. Mary paused by one framed photo of her and David at his graduation. She ran her fingers over the glass and felt the memory wash over her, the pride she felt when she saw his name on that diploma. They sat in the living room, and David brought over a small box of her favorite chocolates. He handed her one, and she tasted its sweet center, smiling at the familiar flavor. They talked quietly about the flight, about the people who had shown kindness, about the lessons learned from a simple seat assignment. Mary felt grateful that something so small had sparked a conversation about respect and humanity. Later that evening, Mary stood by the window of David's office, looking out at the city lights. David joined her, handing her a cup of herbal tea. It's mild, he said, just like you like it. Mary accepted the cup and wrapped her hands around it, feeling its gentle warmth. She leaned against the window and watched the lights below. David stood beside her, his hand resting on her shoulder. She closed her eyes and felt the moment settle into her heart. She thought of the journey they had taken together from a small apartment where they had dreamed big, to the cabins of airplanes where they had learned humility, to the corporate offices where they now worked to make a better world. She thought about how every challenge, every hard decision, every act of love had led them here. She opened her eyes and to him, David, she said softly, thank you for letting me share in your life like this. He smiled, and his eyes glowed with tenderness. Always, Mother, he replied. Your guidance is my compass. As the night grew deeper, Mother and son sat together, sipping tea and sharing stories. Mary felt a profound sense of fulfillment. She had raised her son with love, taught him kindness, and now watched him carry those values forward to millions of people. She realized that her role was not over. She would continue to guide him, to offer her wisdom, to remind him gently of the power of empathy. Before Mary left the next morning, David walked her to the door and hugged her close. "Safe travels," he said. Mary nodded, her eyes shining. "In safe flights," she teased lightly. They laughed softly, and Mary turned to leave. "Shh." She walked down the driveway, carrying her small bouquet of daisies in a vase beside her. She looked back once, seeing David at the doorway, his hand raised in a wave. She waved back, her heart full. On the drive home, Mary reflected on how a simple moment trading in economy class had become a story that touched so many hearts. She thought about the passengers who had shown her kindness, the flight crew who had apologized and tried to help, the whispers that had reminded her of the power of understanding. Most of all, she thought about her son and the man he had become. When Mary returned home, she placed the daisies on her kitchen table and sat down in her favorite chair. She looked around her cozy living room, filled with memories and love. She felt a gentle satisfaction settle in her soul. She had lived a full life, one of hard work, sacrifices made out of love, and quiet triumphs that no newspaper could capture. She picked up her phone and saw a notification from the airline staff group. Messages of support and pride in the new memo. Appreciation for the reminder to treat every passenger with respect. Mary smiled. Her son was making a difference, and she had helped shape the man who would shape the lives of so many. Mary closed her eyes and leaned back, breathing in the peaceful silence of her home. She felt complete, knowing that the story of that flight would live on in the hearts of those who heard it. And in that simple, powerful truth that dignity belongs to everyone, Mary Thompson found the deepest reward of all.